Hello, everyone, and welcome to your video lecture for scholarly writing, the conference paper, also known as the research synthesis. So in this video, I'm going to go over the assignment sheet. I'm going to go over the big outlining activity that leads up to it, and then we're going to go over the schedule briefly. So to begin, what is the conference paper itself? Well, in the syllabus, I'm calling this a research synthesis. Now, please don't let those two phrases confuse you. These are the same document. You'll hear why I'm using those in a minute. So, why a conference paper? Well, a conference paper because you just wrote a conference abstract, so now you're going to write the paper that follows from that abstract. So we're building on what we did. That's answer one. Answer two is in the assignment sheet here, which I'm going to use the cursor to highlight, well, to go over. Conference papers are something of a tweener genre of scholarly writing. They're not usually cited by future researchers because they're not peer-reviewed or usually published, but they communicate discourse community-specific knowledge to an audience of experts. So when we talk about a conference, let's think about this where this lies in the whole knowledge production process that we're mirroring and mimicking in this course. When we talk about the production of knowledge, the ultimate goal is a peer-reviewed study, article, or book, some kind of publication where the researcher's findings are approved by their peers, and the peers say, okay, we think this all meets our quality standards, it speaks to a pressing concern in the field. We agree, this is true, this is knowledge. From this point forward, this study should be able to be cited by future researchers. So it's essentially like an initiation into a discourse community. So the conference paper is part of the writing process and research process that leads up to those publications. Peer-reviewed studies, depending on the field that you're in, can take anywhere from a few months to years to complete. So along the way, of course, work doesn't stop. So a conference is kind of like a check-in location along the way. You've conducted your research, you're beginning to write your conclusions, maybe you present a part of a larger study, but it's a chance to get up in front of a room of people and give a paper. So the idea is, usually these things, there will be panelists of 3 to 5 people. Each will present for 10 to 20 minutes, perhaps with a visual aid, and after the people have finished presenting, there will be a discussion with the audience. And remember, this is a discourse community audience, so everybody speaks the language, they know the jargon, they have the concerns, they're all there to create knowledge through the discussion and publication of information about a shared interest. So the conference paper is, again, selected on the basis of its relevance, of its currency, and also of its interest to the most people, because these these discourse community gatherings are of people who normally have some kind of vested interest in the conversation. So we want something that they want to hear. So usually when we write a conference paper in a discourse community, you're presenting findings, but you're not sure yet maybe how they connect to everything else you're doing, or you're having difficulty working through one part of a larger project, or you're excited about a new finding, but you haven't had time yet to put it into the larger context that you need to do for the peer-reviewed study. So you go to a conference, you present the idea, and you get feedback from your other discourse community members through the Q&A, through cocktail hour conversations. It's a low-stakes type of environment without the kind of time and intensity that's involved with the full peer review process, which can take on its own upwards of a couple of months to complete, even in some fields. So this is a way to get feedback, save time, and present something that's maybe not quite as polished yet. So like a rough draft of, not even a rough draft. Think of the conference paper as analogous to, like, I gave you an assignment to go get sources and write a little bit about them, but not write a paper yet. That's kind of the stage that conference papers would be equivalent to in an adult discourse community. So anyway, so when we say they're a tweener genre, that's what we mean. They're intended for a scholarly audience of knowledgeable discourse community members, but they're not yet like perfect, refined, revised, ready for publication as is. So they're generally meant to stimulate conversation and advance an inquiry into a topic. Now, don't take that to mean that conference papers are things that are poorly written, shoddy, or not good work. They are. The point is they're still just more open to feedback. And based on the nature of our course, that's why I use this type of assignment here. So you can read this all on your own, but where you really want to get to is this part down here. Write a 5-page paper responding to a CFP from a relevant scholarly organization or conference. You have the CFP, you have the abstract, now you're writing the paper. What are you doing? You're writing a researched argument. So let's consider both words. A researched argument makes active use of current research in your academic field. We've covered that through the preceding work. It deploys that research through appropriate methods of citation and bibliography. We've covered that in previous assignments. It uses that research in the source of a central argument, a claim supported by relevant evidence. So what does that mean? It means, and this is where we get to the notes, that we are working with what are, I think, derisively called secondary sources. So we're working with primary studies, articles, reports that do research on actual places, people, events, organizations, ideas. We're writing about the scholarship about the issue, okay? It's really important to understand that. So what does this mean? It means that your conference paper, excuse me, is ultimately more of a research synthesis, there's that phrase again, than a new claim about an as yet unstudied thing. So we're putting together what we have, our knowledge front, our sources, to make a claim about a conversation and the way that research is conducted within our discourse community as it relates to our inquiry question. So in the end, your argument will be something of the form, existing work does or shows X, and here's how we can do better, improve more. Here's what we shouldn't do. Your audience is other members of your discourse community, other people interested in discussing and writing about shared interests and creating knowledge about those. You are not writing for a public or professional audience, and that's really key to remember here, because that's kind of what validates this paper and says, well, yeah, we might be working with scholarship rather than primary type stuff, but that's fine, because our audience are the people who write these things. So they have a vested interest in what we're doing. Do you see what I mean here? This isn't a paper that no one's going to wonder why it matters, because your audience is the discourse community. So you're talking to people in the conversation about the conversation. They're engaged with it. They care about it. This isn't a kind of into the void, why does this matter type assignment. Briefly, I do want to mention your argument will be something of the form. So there's a few different ways to think about your argument in a paper like this. One is sources 1, 2, and 3 have done this. I agree, but they haven't yet looked at this type of application for their work. So you're extending someone else's work. You could also say existing sources do A, B, and C, and I think A and B are fine, but I disagree with C, here's why. You can modify what's going on already. If you can't find evidence of people looking at the precise question that you want to look at, you can say, currently, we've considered topics A, B, and C, which are relevant, but because we've done this, we've kind of failed to see this intersection that here I've identified and I'm going to investigate. So these are a few different ways to kind of begin to approach this type of an argument. It's really important that your argument here be phrased in terms of existing work and what still has to happen or what shouldn't happen, etc. We're not really writing about the matter per se. We're writing about the way in which it's studied, etc. So that's an important kind of distinction to make in terms of applicability. So I have a couple sample papers that I've uploaded to give you an idea of what we're trying to do. They're not perfect. They do a lot of things pretty well, though. What you really want to remember about this project is your audience and why you're writing. You're writing about a conversation to people involved in a conversation to help direct the conversation. It's all about what we're talking about, what we're studying, and how we're doing it, why it matters. These are the types of questions that you need to consider as you're making your argument. Now, in terms of the form of this project, it is a short paper, so you don't necessarily have to use headings. The sample papers do use headings. I think headings can be useful in focusing you as a writer and also your reader in terms of what you want them to consider while they're looking at something. At the same time, it's not so much the headings, it's the organization of the paper that matters. And again, in a short paper, every line matters. So to help you prepare this, and I'm going to vanish momentarily while I get this other activity on the screen. Here we go. Let me zoom in a little bit, and then you'll see me pop up again in a second. Okay. Oh, that wasn't. Here we go. And here I am. So when we outline it, this is a way to think through what we're going to say and why we're going to say it. This is a big outline activity I'm asking you to do. This isn't like a simple, straightforward outline. I'm asking you here to think about purpose, why you're writing, and content, how it matters, and 3, structure, organization, why you're presenting it in this way. So what are we going to do? You're going to do the kind of old school outline where you have the Roman numeral, the letter, the supporting layer here. And the idea behind this format of an outline, if you're not familiar with it, is to visually distinguish kind of hierarchies, classes of what you're saying. So your claim, that's going to be like Roman numeral 1. What's your idea in this section? What's your statement that you're trying to make about the material? If you have a subclaim that narrows or otherwise limits the scope of the claim, you want to begin with that. And then when we get into our evidence, the source material presented as quotation, paraphrase, or summary, the 3 ways you integrate evidence from text. Of course, you can also bring in a graph or an image if you want to explicate it, that's fine. And then your kind of tertiary level here, the source title, relevant page numbers, reading notes, just to really force you to think about how are you going to engage with your sources. And then, of course, your reason. Analyze your evidence and explain to your reader, it's a typo that I should correct, why your evidence supports your claim and a subclaim, repeat the claim too. I want you to do this for each of the sections that I've outlined here, because this is, again, you might notice this mirrors and kind of mimics the structure of a paragraph. A paragraph is the basic unit of writing in an essay. If we mirror that structure on the outline level, we have a chance to work strictly with the content and ideas of what we're trying to say rather than the whole kind of apparatus of the essay. And then we can go through and blow the outline up into the paper. It's a lot easier. So what are we going to do then? I want you to pay special attention to listing any sources that will be cited in a particular section and explain the use of that source. So why are you using the source in this section? So we're thinking about it here not necessarily with respect to like the knowledge front, although that may be relevant. We're thinking of this with respect to your paper. How does this paragraph that you're outlining, this section of your paper that you're outlining, how does it help you persuade your reader? And why this source in this location, and how are you going to use it? And we want to see that because we want to think really clearly about the purpose for selecting the content that goes into each section of this paper. So I have a list of questions for you to answer for each section. I don't know that you have to go into like intense detail about everything in response to this, but at the same time, I do want you to really use this activity to plan your entire paper, okay? Use this activity to plan your entire paper. So here are the 5 headings that I want you to consider in this outlining activity, and I do want you to use the you may, but you don't have to use these in a final paper, right? I want you to use these in the outline because, again, they're about purpose. What happens early on? We introduce the topic. Tell your reader, your discourse community audience, what you're going to do, why you're writing, who you're writing to, what problem you're going to solve, why it matters, and what's your thesis, argument, and conclusion. Okay? That's step 1. Step 2, the lit review. Primary objective of the section is to provide your readers with the necessary information about and from your sources. This is where you tell us why you're using the sources, how they shape the conversation, how they coalesce into a cohesive knowledge front. This is where you do most of your selective quoting, paraphrase, and summary. This is where you really get the content out and tell us about it. Discussion, this is where you put the sources into conversation with each other. You compare and contrast, you critique, you analyze, you reason, you explain why some approaches might be better than others, how if we put methods A and B together, we get a new way of doing things. Maybe your discourse community hasn't considered a method or a technology or a theory from a whole other field of study, and you want to do interdisciplinary work, and you're proposing it. This might be where you kind of position that within the existing literature that you've just reviewed. So the literature review is where you tell us how your discourse community has approached the study of this topic, and this discussion is where you offer your assessment, critique, analysis, evaluation of it. Limitations. Easy to skip over this section, but this is where you can narrow the scope of your argument. You might say where it doesn't apply. You might say how you could have done more work if you had additional resources, time, capabilities. You might, if it really doesn't work, you might say, hey, this didn't work. Here's why, and go into some more detail about it. And at that point, I would expect a fairly lengthy limitation section. And then, of course, conclusions and future study. Offer your discourse community members direction as to what to do next. Refer back to your analysis from the discussion section. Acknowledge the limitations. Maybe hit a little from the lit review. I don't think you want to bring it back. You don't want to approach your conclusion of this paper like a summary. You're not summarizing the whole paper. You're leaving us with suggestions for future work. That's a really important distinction. So, in terms of the schedule, how is this going to work here? First, the outline activity, and then you have a peer response to the outline activity, and then you have the draft, peer review, and that's it. So, there's your process. Any questions, of course, reach out. Use a discussion thread if it's something that you think relates to the whole class. And good luck. This is usually, this is the kind of culmination of the course in a sense. So I'm excited to see the work that you all come up with.